Avery Morales worked in silence. The kind of silence that wasn't just the absence of noise, but the kind that came from knowing no one was looking your way. The rifle bay was tucked in the back corner of the compound behind the weapons cages. Past the motor pool, a little too far for anyone to pass through unless they meant to. She liked it that way. While most of the base buzzed with action boots on concrete, shouted orders, Black Hawks slicing the sky, her space stayed still. It smelled of oil, steel, sweat, and the faint sting of solvent. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't decorated. Just a cement room with long tables, racks of rifles, and the soft clicking of moving parts. Avery had been working there for 2 years. She wasn't military. She didn't wear rank on her chest or boots on her feet. She was a civilian contractor hired to maintain, clean, and calibrate some of the most advanced weapon systems in the world. Most of the men she worked around didn't speak to her. Unless necessary, that was fine with her. She wasn't there to impress. She was there to do a job better than anyone expected her to. Each rifle had its own rhythm. She could take apart an M4 with her eyes closed. She understood the delicate balance of an overused spring, the microscopic signs of metal fatigue before it became dangerous. Weapons spoke if you listened close enough, and Avery had learned to listen better than anyone. Her hands moved with practiced grace, her fingers slick with oil. She wore black nitrile gloves, not because she needed to, but because it gave her work a sense of ritual. Cleaning a rifle wasn't just about removing dirt. It was about restoring trust that this machine would work when life depended on it. Avery never asked questions about where the weapons had been or what they'd done. Blood was never visible, but she sometimes imagined the weight they carried. Each nick in the receiver, each warped charging handle told a silent story. These weren't parade rifles. These were tools of war, and the men who carried them particularly. The SEALs trusted them more than they trusted words. The SEALs never lingered. They entered fast, dropped off gear, sometimes nodded, rarely spoke. A few of them didn't even know her name. To them, she was the girl in the bay. She was aware of the divide between them and her. It wasn't personal. It was just how it was. Their world was battlefields and brotherhood. Hers was bolts, optics, and steel. She remembered the first time she saw them up close. It had been early in her contract, and the SEAL team had come in straight from a mission. They were covered in dust and sweat, eyes hard and shoulders heavy. One of them handed her a jammed rifle with a grunt. She'd fixed it in under a minute. No thanks, no words. Just a glance that held something she couldn't name at the time, maybe surprise. Still, no one said anything. Not then. She didn't mind. Growing up in a military family taught her early on, respect wasn't always loud. It was rarely given, but always earned. Her father, a retired Army mechanic, had told her once, "Soldiers don't care who fixes the bird, as long as it flies when they need it." She took that to heart. It wasn't about glory. It was about being essential. But some days, she wondered. She tried to enlist once. 18, fresh out of high school, heart full of fire. But the medical examiner had stopped her cold. Heart murmur. Not dangerous, but enough to disqualify her. Sorry, they said, as if that was supposed to mean anything. Her dreams of wearing a uniform vanished in a moment. She remembered standing in the parking lot of the recruitment center, unsure if she was more angry or ashamed that her father hadn't said much then, just offered her a ride home. That night, he handed her a set of his old tools and told her, "If you can't serve the mission, serve the ones who do." And so she had now. Years later, her life was a quiet pattern of repetition. Clean, restore, log, repeat. She didn't go out for drinks with anyone. She didn't chat in the mess hall. Her world was this bay, this steel. These stories she couldn't tell. And if there was a part of her that still longed to be more, to stand among the warriors she supported, well, she kept that buried where no one could see Dot until that night. Dot had started like any other evening. The sun was slipping low over the base, throwing golden light across the tarmac. Most of the unit had cleared out for the day. Avery stayed behind, finishing a batch of carbines that had come back from an urban sim-op. She was humming softly to herself, lost in the rhythm of work. When the door to the bay creaked open, she looked up and froze. Chief Petty Officer Grant Keller stood in the doorway, leader of the SEAL team she serviced. Always quiet, always unreadable. He stepped inside, wordless. In his hands was a weapon she recognized immediately, his personal SCAR rifle. Custom-fitted, matte black, worn from years of operations. It wasn't standard issue. It was his. He didn't say anything. He just placed it on her workbench and stepped back. No instructions. No small talk. Just a gesture. Avery stared at the rifle for a long moment, her heartbeat slow and heavy. She slipped her gloves back on, and then she got to work. Avery Morales had always known how to stay in the background. She learned it young, growing up in a military household where the rules were clear and the walls held more medals than family photos. Her father, Sergeant Daniel Morales, was a man of discipline and grit, the kind of soldier who didn't speak unless he had something to say, and when he did, you listened. He raised her like you would have raised a son. No frills, no excuses. By age 8, she could field strip a basic rifle, faster than most teenagers. By 10, she was watching combat footage beside him, asking questions not about glory, but about mechanics. What jammed? What misfired? What saved lives? Her childhood was a tight blend of silence, structure, and service. There were no bedtime stories, but there were long evenings in the garage, learning to repair engines, patch gear, and sharpen blades. While other kids were playing, Avery was tightening bolts and adjusting scopes. She never resented it. If anything, it gave her a language most people couldn't understand, a quiet reverence for tools that protected people. By the time she turned 18, her future seemed carved in stone. She'd pass her physicals, enlist, maybe work her way into weapons tech or become an armorer for special units. She didn't dream of front lines or fame. She just wanted to serve, to belong to something greater than herself. To earn the uniform her father once folded so carefully in their home. But the dream shattered in the harsh glow of the recruitment office's fluorescent lights. The heart murmur wasn't dangerous. It barely showed on tests. But military regulations were blunt, abnormal cardiovascular response to exertion, not fit for service. The doctor delivered the news like a weather report. No apology, no room for appeal. Just a flat rejection, stamped in red ink. She'd walked out of that building like a ghost, barely able to feel her feet beneath her. The entire ride home, she kept staring at her hands, the same hands that had assembled, cleaned, and respected every weapon her father had ever owned. Hands that were ready, but weren't allowed. That night, her father didn't say much, just handed her a beer and sat beside her on the back porch. The silence stretched until the sky turned indigo and the crickets started singing. Then, finally, he spoke. "You don't need a uniform to serve," he said. "You just need to be where you're needed." She didn't know what that meant then. But 5 years later, she understood. Her job as a civilian contractor came quietly. No ceremony, no welcome party, just a background check, an equipment list, and a key to the rifle bay. Most people thought cleaning and servicing weapons was beneath them. Grunt work. Boring. But Avery didn't see it that way. To her, it was holy ground. Every dent, every scratch on those rifles told a story she wasn't part of, but she could still protect the next chapter. She may not have been allowed to carry one, but she could make sure it worked when it mattered most. That was her mission. Still, despite her pride, she remained invisible. The SEALs didn't look her in the eye. They handed over their gear like tossing it to a machine. She got used to it. She never expected recognition. These men were forged in fire, steel-eyed and battle-hardened. She was just the girl in the corner who kept their tools sharp, but part of her still felt the ache. It wasn't about wanting to be one of them. She knew she'd never wear their patch or walk in their boots. It was about wanting to matter. 2. Be more than a silent support beam. To know deep down that her presence made a difference in a room full of warriors. Then came the incident with the malfunctioned M110 sniper rifle. It arrived after a training op, slammed down hard on her table. With visible frustration, one of the SEALs grunted something under his breath about a half-second delay during a critical shot. She picked up the rifle, inspecting it slowly. Within 10 seconds, she spotted the issue. A misaligned gas block and carbon fouling on the piston channel. Avery cleaned it, realigned it, and had it functioning flawlessly in under 5 minutes. The SEAL didn't say a word, just stared at her, nodded once, and walked away. Later that week, more rifles came her way with no explanation. Worn optics, delayed triggers, weakened ejection springs. Always delivered silently. Always picked up with subtle appreciation, and always watched from the corner of the bay by Chief Petty Officer Grant Keller. Keller wasn't like the others. He never cracked jokes, never raised his voice. He carried the weight of command like a shadow that never left his shoulders. Avery had seen him walk through the bay dozens of times without speaking a word. But she had always felt his eyes on her work, not in judgment, but in quiet curiosity. That was the week everything changed. She didn't understand the shift at first, just that things had gotten quieter, but more intentional. The SEALs no longer dropped off their weapons like trash. They placed them down with care. Some even waited while she worked, asking small questions. Not to test her, to learn. Something was happening, something unspoken. And then came the night Keller walked into the bay after hours, placed his own rifle on her table, and stepped back. That gesture, that simple, powerful moment, did more than a medal ever could. It was the turning point. The moment the ghosts of rejection faded and something new took shape. Respect, unspoken, but undeniable. The next day, Avery arrived at the rifle bay early, the way she always did. Morning sunlight filtered through the high, dusty windows, casting long shadows across the racks of weapons waiting for care. She liked starting before anyone else arrived. In those first quiet moments, the bay was hers, no one rushing her, no tension, no eyes watching. Except today felt different. The air had changed. Somehow. She walked toward her bench and found it cleared. Her usual stack of rifles, tagged, numbered, half disassembled, was missing. In their place sat one weapon, a well-used M4A1, with a note underneath it. Just 3 words, scrawled in tight handwriting: Run diagnostics, Keller. Her hands paused. It wasn't the task that stopped her. She'd run diagnostics on hundreds of M4 South. What hit her was who had written the note. Keller. The man who barely spoke. The man who last night had handed her his personal rifle like a knight, offering a sword, then walked out without a single word. Now, for the first time ever, he was requesting something directly from her. Avery took a breath and picked up the rifle. It was lighter than she expected, slightly loose near the upper. Receiver barely noticeable, but not to her. She popped the pins, broke it open, and began to work. She wasn't halfway through when she felt the presence. Someone stood at the bay door. She looked up. It wasn't Keller this time. It was Drew "Smoke" Tanners, one of the younger SEALs. tall, lean, and always carrying himself like he had a joke just waiting behind his lips. Except today, he wasn't smiling. He held a rifle loosely in his hands and shifted awkwardly. "Mind if I hang out?" he asked. "Been having some weird ejection issues." Avery nodded toward the workbench. "Set it down. I'll take a look." He did, but he didn't walk away. Instead, Smoke leaned back against the far wall and watched her work. Not like a skeptic, not like someone waiting to criticize. He was studying her, genuinely curious. "I heard about last night," he said after a beat. Avery didn't look up. "From who?" He smirked. "You know how it is. Word travels fast when something unusual happens." She didn't reply, but her hands kept moving with practiced rhythm. She could feel his eyes still on her. "You're fast," he said. She gave a short shrug. "It's all repetition, precision, muscle memory." He chuckled. "That's funny. That's exactly how Keller described shooting." That made her glance up for the first time. He wasn't being sarcastic. His expression was calm, respectful. "What's the issue with yours?" she asked, nodding toward the rifle he'd brought in. "Ejector's lagging. Had a few stovepipes on our last sim. Didn't feel right." Avery picked it up and inspected it quickly. "It's the spring. Tension's off by a few ounces." "Easy. Fix. See?" He grinned. "You just know." "Only because I've touched about 10,000 of these," she said, smirking for the first time. Over the next hour, more of them came, not in a crowd, not in formation, just one by one. Each seal with a different excuse. A scope acting up, a trigger pull that felt too loose, a suppressed rifle making a strange noise under pressure. Some stayed silent, others made small talk. But every one of them stayed long enough to watch her hands. No one asked where she trained. No one questioned her credentials. They didn't need to. They could see it. Avery realized something unusual was happening. She was being tested, but not in the way she had always feared. This wasn't about grilling her. This was quiet validation. A series of soft invitations to prove she belonged. And by noon, the final confirmation arrived. Keller returned. He didn't announce himself, didn't speak, just walked into the bay and scanned the room. 4 of his team were inside, chatting softly with Avery while she fine-tuned a malfunctioning scope. Keller walked over, picked up the M4 she had finished that morning, checked the bolt with a smooth flick, and then met her eyes. "Clean," he said simply. Avery nodded. He turned to the team. "Let's move. Briefing in 10. One by one, the SEALs nodded and began filing out, grabbing their gear. Smoke paused at the door, looked back at Avery, and gave her a slow, deliberate nod, the kind of nod men gave each other in the field after walking through hell. Then he followed the rest. And just like that, the bay was silent again. Avery stood still for a moment, letting the weight of the morning sink in. She hadn't earned anyone's respect by speaking louder or demanding recognition. She hadn't tried to prove herself. She'd just done what she always did, worked, listened, fixed, and focused. But for the first time, someone saw the difference. The SEALs hadn't changed. They were still warriors, still ghosts trained for the worst the world had to offer. But now, they knew there was one person, one civilian, in a quiet corner of the base, who could see what others missed, hear what metal whispered, and keep there. Lifelines sharp. And maybe, just maybe, that was the beginning of something she thought she'd never be part of. The bay was dark, quiet, and colder than usual that night. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a sterile glow across Avery's workbench. Everyone else had gone home. She preferred it this way. No distractions, no side eyes. Just her in the machinery she knew better than most people. Her gloves were already stained with carbon and solvent. She was working on a battered Mk-18 standard seal rifle, but this one had clearly seen some hell. There were signs of wear you didn't get from training. Small fractures, a heat bloom along the suppressor, residue baked deep into the crevices. Whoever carried it had leaned on it hard. She was halfway through cleaning when the bay door opened with a low creak. Avery turned, assuming it was one of the junior techs, but froze when she saw who stepped inside. Chief Grant Keller. Alone. No team. Behind him, no words on his lips. Just him, tall, quiet, deliberate, like always. He crossed the room slowly, his boots making only the barest noise on the concrete. In his right hand, he carried a rifle. Not just any rifle, his rifle. The matte black Scar 17. Custom optics. Suppressed barrel. Worn finish. Battle-tested and trusted by only one man. Avery's throat tightened. He approached her bench, stopping just short of it. Their eyes met, and for a long moment, he said nothing. Then, with emotion so calm, it felt rehearsed, he placed the weapon down in front of her and stepped back. That was it. No words. No instructions. No explanation. Avery stared at the rifle, then back at him. Keller didn't move. He stood there, arms folded behind his back, expression unreadable, watching. Avery's fingers flexed, nervously. This wasn't a test. This was trust. There were protocols, lines. Civilian contractors weren't supposed to touch personal weapons, unless officially instructed. But this wasn't a formal order. It was something deeper. A silent signal passed between professionals. An invitation into a circle not easily entered. Her hands hovered over the weapon. This wasn't just steel and plastic. It was an extension of Keller's instincts, a part of him that had likely saved lives and ended others. Touching it wasn't just maintenance. It was sacred. Still, she didn't hesitate. She pulled on her gloves. First, she cleared it, then set to work, stripping the rifle with practiced ease. It was heavier than most carbines. She recognized the modifications immediately. Aftermarket trigger, hand-fitted buffer system, reinforced extractor spring. It was built for control, reliability, and silence. A sniper's preference. Close quarters, but deadly accurate. She cleaned the bolt first. The carbon buildup told her he hadn't had time to run a full scrub since his last op. Not neglect, necessity. She polished the internals, made a slight micro-adjustment to the trigger shoe, and replaced a heat-warped pin she found in the lower receiver. Throughout it all, Keller said nothing. He didn't need to. She finished in under 10 minutes, reassembled it, tested the cycle, and handed it back without a word. Keller took it, ran a quick function check with fluid natural motions, then paused. His eyes flicked to hers. "Why did you adjust the trigger?" His voice was quiet, steady. She didn't blink. "You favor short breaks. Your old setting had creep. You were overcompensating with your grip. That's why your shots were dragging slightly left." A beat of silence. Then, a slight raise of his eyebrows. Not surprise, exactly. Something closer to approval. Keller nodded once, then slung the rifle over his shoulder. Before he turned to leave, he paused and said one more thing. "Keep doing what you're doing." And then he was gone. The door clicked softly shut behind him. Avery stood frozen for several seconds, her heart pounding, her mind replaying the moment over and over. It wasn't just that he'd let her handle his personal weapon. It was the way he did it. No announcement, no fanfare, just quiet, intentional trust. The kind built over time and given rarely, especially by someone like Keller. She sat back on her stool, staring at the spot where his rifle had rested. Her fingers were still trembling slightly, though not from nerves. From the weight of what had just happened. It was the first time in her life that someone had looked past her uniform, or lack thereof, and acknowledged her skill in the same breath as any soldier. She wasn't just a technician now. She was a trusted hand. Someone in the inner circle. And though no one else had seen it happen, Avery knew something had shifted permanently that night. The divide between civilian and operator was real. But she had just been invited to straddle the line. And she wasn't going to step back. Not now. Not ever. The shift didn't happen overnight, but it was unmistakable. After that evening with Keller, Avery noticed a slow, steady change ripple through the bay. It wasn't loud. There were no announcements, no formal orders. Just subtle, deliberate moments. A rifle left on her bench without a note. A SEAL pausing to ask if she preferred frog loop over CLP for carbon buildup. A small nod when she passed in the hallway. To the average eye, nothing was different. But Avery had been invisible long enough to recognize. When she was finally being seen. It began with Reese, the team's point man. He walked into the bay early. One morning, a battered M110 slung over his shoulder. His face was unreadable, but his voice was clear. Had a misfire yesterday. Scopes acting off? You mind? Avery blinked, then nodded. He laid the rifle down gently, a small act of respect, and stepped back. He didn't hover. He didn't question her work. He just waited. She checked the mount, alignment, and rangefinder. Then she made 2 adjustments and handed it back. Your zero shifted, she explained. Slight fracture on the mount's locking lug. Replaced it. You're good. Reese nodded once. Appreciated. Simple words, but heavy with meaning. Later that day, Drew, smoke. Tanner's returned, this time with his backup Glock. Trigger's gummy, he said. Been sticking on the reset. She stripped it down, cleaned the striker channel, swapped the spring, and re-lubed the entire system in under 10 minutes. When she handed it back, Smoke asked quietly, How the hell do you know all this? Avery shrugged. I listened to the weapon. He gave a low laugh. You sound like Keller. That surprised her. Is that a compliment? He grinned. Only if you believe in ghosts. And then he left. She couldn't explain it, but every time a weapon came to her without instruction, it felt like a test, not one laid out formally, but one passed between professionals. These were elite operators. They didn't waste time. If you didn't prove your worth, you didn't last. There were skeptics, of course. One of them was Jackson, a visiting team member on temporary assignment. He had the build of a linebacker and the ego to match. He stepped into the bay one afternoon, watched her work for a while, and finally scoffed. Didn't know they let civvies play gunsmith? He muttered loud enough for everyone to hear. Avery didn't look up. I don't play, he snorted. Right. You ever shoot one of these? Nope. Then what the hell do you know about them? She set down the cleaning rod and wiped her gloves slowly. Know the difference between a hairline crack in a bolt carrier that causes failure at round 800 and a full break that leaves you dead at round 805. Jackson crossed his arms, unimpressed. Still theory, book stuff. Keller appeared in the doorway before she could reply. No, he said, his voice flat. It's field-proven. The room froze. Jackson blinked. She's your cleaner? No, Keller said. She's my precision. Then he walked away. Avery exhaled slowly after he left. Jackson didn't say another word. That evening, she sat alone in the bay after hours, watching the light fade through the high windows. Her tools were spread across the table, but her mind was elsewhere. She thought about her old recruiter, the way he had apologized, as if it made any difference. She thought about her father, and the quiet, proud way he had once told her, there's honor in being the last hands to touch a weapon before it goes to war. And she thought about Keller, the man who never said more than necessary, yet somehow made her feel more seen in one sentence than others had in years. She hadn't changed who she was to earn their trust. She hadn't faked toughness or played at being one of the guys. She had let her work speak, let her skill and patience become the conversation. And it was working. Now, more often than not, the SEALs came to her first, not just with problems, but with questions about optics, loadouts, trigger preferences, even field feedback. Avery found herself scribbling notes in the margins of their maintenance logs. Small, personalized suggestions. Try heavier lube for sub-zero ops. This spring is showing fatigue. Consider swapping at 1,000 rounds. Optic reticle slightly off. Likely a drop, not user error. They started reading her notes. They started listening. And when a visiting captain made a passing comment about over-reliance on civilian contractors, Keller didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. He just said, "She keeps our weapons alive, which means she keeps us alive. You want to tell her she doesn't belong? You go first." The captain dropped it. Avery didn't hear that story until days later, passed to her through a whisper from smoke. She didn't respond, just smiled faintly and went back to scrubbing carbon. But inside, something settled, solid, unshakable. She no longer needed to prove herself. She already had Dot, and with every rifle she restored, every sight she recalibrated, she was stitching herself deeper into the fabric of a brotherhood that didn't hand out trust lightly. The quiet test was over. She passed. The morning started with a buzzing phone and a message stamped urgent. Avery rarely received texts from Operations Command, but this one was an actual. Live training op. Field observers needed. Suit up. Keller. She stared at it for a moment, blinking against the early sunlight filtering through her window. She wasn't sure if suit up meant anything more than the usual. Clipboard, tools, and a neutral-colored vest. But the fact that Keller had texted her directly, that meant something. By 0730, she was at the launch point, standing off to the side as the SEAL team did final checks on gear, radios, and weapons. The mock operation was meant to simulate an urban breach under nightfall conditions. There were simulated explosives, designated hostiles, and 2 embedded field techs, one of whom, this time, was Avery. She wasn't there to fight. She wasn't even supposed to touch anything. Her role was purely observational, to document equipment stress, weapon malfunctions, and suggest mechanical improvements post-exercise. But she brought her tools anyway, just in case. The op began smoothly. Avery and the other observer, a systems analyst named Ellis, watched from a tactical van half a mile away. They monitored comms, body cam feeds, and logged real-time performance data. Through Keller's chest cam, Avery saw the team move like ghosts, smooth, precise, ruthless. It was a dance honed through years of danger. The breach went as expected. Room by room cleared in seconds. Until the third phase. A sharp crack in the audio feed. Then, weapon jammed. Secondary not responding. Avery sat up straight. It was Reese's voice. Another pause. Then Smoke added, "Guns dead? Fallback?" "No fallback. Complete op." Keller snapped over comms. Avery didn't think. She just grabbed her kit. "Where?" "Are you going?" Ellis asked, alarmed. "They've got a weapons failure," she said, already moving. "I can fix it in the field." "You're not cleared." "I'm not waiting for clearance." She was out the door before he could protest further. She reached the perimeter of the training site just as the team pulled into their backup defensive position behind a simulated concrete wall. The atmosphere was tense, not panic, but real. Frustration. The whole drill had halted over a single failure. Reese was crouched, his HK-416 on the ground beside him, stripped halfway open. His face was grim. Avery knelt beside him, breathing hard. "What happened?" "Double feed. I tried to clear it, but the bolts stuck. Secondary jammed too. Useless." She didn't ask for permission. She grabbed the rifle, checked the chamber, and spotted the issue immediately. A swollen casing had warped the chamber wall. Not common, and not fixable with just a tap-rack bang. "You have a pick?" she asked. Smoke handed her a multi-tool. Avery dug into the chamber with precision, easing out the ruptured casing without damaging the barrel. She flipped open her kit, swapped in a backup bolt she had brought from the van, just in case, then tested the cycle. It ran smooth. "Try it now," she said, handing it back to Reese. He shouldered the weapon, aimed toward the mock hostile building, and fired 3. Clean shots. No delay. "No jam," he exhaled. "You just saved the op." Keller's voice came from behind her. "Let's finish it." The team surged forward again. Mission resumed. Avery stepped back, letting the adrenaline bleed from her system. She stood in silence as the team cleared the last 2 buildings, now fully functional. The exercise ended successfully, with all objectives marked completed. The debriefing came an hour later. In the tent, a dozen men sat in folding chairs, still damp with sweat. Keller stood at the front, arms folded, letting the silence stretch before he spoke. Weapons failure halted the op at Phase 3. He said, "Could have ended it right there." He looked at Avery, but it didn't, because she fixed it under pressure. Fast, clean, accurate. No one said a word. She wasn't cleared to intervene. One of the trainers said from the back. Keller turned his head slowly. "She didn't need to be," he said. She had the skills, and she knew what mattered. Avery didn't shrink under the weight of their eyes. For the first time, she didn't feel like an outsider in the room. She felt like part of the solution. Later, back at the bay, Keller walked. And while she was logging post-op reports, "You carry backup parts to a drill?" She smirked. "I plan for worst-case scenarios." He nodded, the corner of his mouth tugging in what might have been the smallest trace of a smile. "You plan like an operator." That stopped her. She didn't know what to say, so she just nodded and went back to typing. But inside, something had shifted again, not just in how the SEAL saw her, but how she saw herself. She had stepped into a real-world crisis, not in theory, not in the bay, but in the field. And when the moment came, her hands had not hesitated. She had answered a call no one expected her to answer, and she had delivered. After the incident during the training op, nothing was ever quite the same for Avery Morales. The next morning, she stepped into the rifle bay as usual, gloves in one hand, coffee in the other, expecting the quiet routine to resume. But the change had already taken hold. There was a new atmosphere in the air, one she couldn't quite name yet. Less tension, more presence, like a current humming beneath the surface. There were no cheers, no fanfare, no formal acknowledgement of what she had done in the field. That wasn't how the SEALs worked. But now, they nodded when she entered a room. Now, they said things like, "You good with this one, Morales?" Or, "Got a weird sound coming from the suppressor. Want to take a look?" And most telling of all, they waited. They waited while she worked, watched, trusted her hands without questioning her credentials. There was no longer a need to explain herself. Keller had made sure of that. The base's senior operations officer, Commander Reilly, summoned her to the logistics wing a few days later. She thought it was about her contract renewal. It was. Almost due. But when she entered the office, she found Keller sitting in the corner, arms folded, expression as unreadable as always. Commander Reilly motioned for her to sit. "I've reviewed the training op report," he said without preamble. "Keller submitted a request on your behalf." Avery's eyebrows lifted. A request? To promote you, Keller said, voice low but certain, to Tier 1 technical advisor. Her heart paused. That position was typically reserved for former operators, those who had seen combat, deployed multiple times, and returned with both wounds and wisdom. It wasn't given lightly, and it had never, not once, been offered to a civilian without military service. You've got field credibility now, Keller continued. You think ahead. You make things run smoother. Hell, you fixed a catastrophic malfunction on the fly. That's more than most armors ever do in the field. Avery's throat felt tight. But I'm not. Keller cut in. You're not enlisted. Doesn't matter. Commander really folded his hands. We're expanding. Definitions. The world's changed. Skill matters more than labels. You've earned your way in. Avery stared between them, heart thudding. What exactly does the role involve? She asked, steadying her voice. Field testing. Tactical consultations. Gear upgrades. Real-time feedback for active units, Willie replied. You'd work directly with Tier 1 teams. You'll travel, observe, and implement fixes on site. Not just cleaning, innovating. Keller added, we need people like you in the fight. Not holding a rifle, keeping the ones who do alive. It was everything she had wanted. Everything she had worked for, without ever daring to speak it aloud. Yet doubt flickered at the edges. What about the others? She asked. The guys. They won't all like it. Keller didn't blink. They'll adjust. Or fall behind. That was it. That was the moment it became real. She accepted. Within 2 weeks, she had a new security badge, access credentials, and a slate of travel assignments lined up. She was now officially embedded with multiple SEAL units for technical oversight and weapons innovation. The transformation was surreal. Instead of being confined to her concrete bay, she now stood inside mobile field labs in Virginia, forward, operating stations in Alaska, and even on board an aircraft carrier for a month-long weapons calibration tour. And yet, she stayed grounded. She didn't let the title change her. She still cleaned weapons with the same reverence. Still packed backup parts in her own bag, just in case. Still listened more than she spoke. Her first major assignment under the new role came during a live exercise overseas. The unit had been struggling with recoil control on a new rifle variant. Manufacturers blamed user error. Operators blamed faulty stock designs. Avery spent 3 nights with the weapon, firing it herself in simulations, studying impact data, and running diagnostics. She discovered the recoil compensator's pitch had been misaligned by a few degrees. Small enough to go unnoticed, but significant enough to destabilize the shot pattern under repeated fire. She sent the report to HQ. Within a week, the entire shipment was recalled, modified, reissued. Avery didn't care about credit. But when Keller forwarded her the internal memo with the subject line, Morale's analysis saved our asses, she smiled for a long time. Her legend began to grow, not by stories she told, but by stories others whispered. She sees things no one else catches. She fixed a rifle mid-op, never blinked. She's not military, but she's one of us. One night, back at the stateside compound, she walked into the armory and found a young woman sitting alone at a bench, staring at a disassembled Glock with furrowed brows. Avery recognized the look, frustration, self-doubt, isolation. She approached. Gently. Need help? The woman looked up. Yeah. I can't get the slide to align right. Feels off. They told me to just keep trying. Avery took the Glock, adjusted the spring, and handed it back in seconds. Try now. It fit perfectly. The woman stared. How'd you do that? Avery smiled. Experience. And because someone once did the same for me. She walked away, heart full. That night, she stood in her bay, now more of a hub than a hiding place, and looked around. She had never worn a uniform, never fired a shot in anger. But through precision, patience, and relentless pursuit of mastery, she had carved a place inside a world that rarely made room for outsiders. And now, she wasn't just in the room. She was building it. It had been 14 months since Avery Morales had first stepped out of the shadows of the rifle bay and into the field. 14 months since she was just the girl who cleaned guns to the person Tier 1 teams called first when things went wrong. But some things hadn't changed. She still rose before dawn, still preferred grease-stained gloves to small talk, still found quiet comfort in the mechanical language of rifles and pistols, scopes and suppressors. No matter where the mission took her, desert ranges, ship decks, mountain outposts, her heart still lived in the rhythm of calibration and care. That morning, she was back where it all began, the bay. Not because she had to be, because she wanted to be. She had returned from a 6-week tour in the Balkans where she helped retrofit a series of field-deployed optics systems. But now, with the team cycling back to base for a brief rest, she had a rare window to breathe, clean, reset. She was halfway through inspecting Keller's rifle, now practically a piece of history, when the overhead speaker crackled to life. SEAL Team 9. Stand by for immediate deployment. Briefing in 10. Avery froze. They weren't scheduled for anything. Not yet. Something had changed. Keller appeared minutes later, fully geared, expression even graver than usual. His rifle was slung across his chest, hands flexing as he approached. Her urgent extraction up, he said. High-value target went dark. We're going in blind. She didn't ask for details. She knew how these things worked. What's wrong with your gear? She asked, noticing the tension in his stance. He pulled a small case from his pack and set it on her workbench. Inside, a laser sight module, flickering erratically, a clear short in its circuit. We need it working. Night op. No room for error. She nodded and opened her tool roll. Keller stayed. For the first time since she'd met him, he watched her work, not as a test, not as a superior, but as a comrade. An equal. She repaired the circuit, realigned the housing, and sealed it in under 4 minutes. Done. He gave her a long look, then said quietly, You coming to the tarmac? She raised a brow. To send you off? To watch, he replied. You've earned the right to see what your hands protect. She hesitated, then nodded. 20 minutes later, she stood near the edge of the flight line, the rotors of the waiting Black Hawk thundering overhead, the team loading up in practiced silence. Smoke gave her a wink as he climbed aboard. Reese bumped her shoulder in passing, and then Keller appeared, rifle in hand, laser sight now glowing a steady green. Before he boarded, he turned to her. If we don't come back, he said, voice low, don't ever think it didn't matter. She swallowed hard. I already know it did. The bird lifted into the sky and vanished into the night. Avery stood in the wind wash long after they were gone. That night, she didn't sleep. She waited. 6 hours passed. Then 8. At dawn, a single message lit up her encrypted phone. Objective. Secured. Team intact. Gear flawless. Keller. She sat down at her bench and finally let herself exhale. It wasn't glory. She felt. It was peace. A week later, Commander Reilly asked her to speak at a private symposium, a room full of brass, tech developers, and unit advisors. He wanted her to explain what made her work so indispensable, what made her different. She stood at the front of the room in a plain black blouse, gloves stuffed in her back pocket, voice steady. I don't carry a weapon, she began, but I serve the mission. Not with bullets, but precision. Every rifle I touch is a promise that when it matters, it won't fail. That they won't fail. She paused, eyes moving across the silent room. You don't have to pull the trigger to protect someone. You just have to care enough to make sure the trigger works when it has to. When she stepped off the stage, she received no applause. Just something better. Respect. Back in the bay one evening, Keller stopped by after hours. No rifle this time. No broken tech. Just a brown box in his hands. For you, he said, setting it on the table. Avery opened it carefully. Inside was a custom M4A1 carbine. Matte finish. Laser engraved just above the magwell. Precision saves lives. Her initials were on the lower receiver. I'm not cleared to use this, she whispered. It's not for using, he replied. It's a symbol of where you've been and where you stand now. She ran her hand over the smooth finish, breath-catching. You'll never be behind us, he added. Not anymore. She didn't cry, but the weight of those words landed deep, because now she belonged, not by accident, not by invitation, by earning it. Months later, she sat across from a young recruit at a new base in Arizona. The girl looked nervous, fingers fumbling over a rifle. She was trying to clean. Avery leaned over and said gently, "Let me show you." And just like that, the cycle began again. Because service isn't always about pulling the trigger. Sometimes, it's about giving others the confidence to, and making damn sure the weapon in their hands is ready when the moment comes.